Can you see anything?
No.
Okay. So August 2nd, we're going to have Janine Dominguez, who's going to talk about back to school and preparing your child post-COVID/Zoom. In September, we're going to have Sharon Celine, and she's going to be talking about parenting your ADHD child now. And then in October 4th, Ari Tuckman will be here, and he's going to either talk about why they lie and what to do about it, or about ADHD after dark. We have to talk. And if you have a preference, please let me know.
So you're saying he's going to talk about why people lie to get other people into bed?
What a great integration of the two thoughts. Thank you, Brendan. That was wonderful. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Brendan. He's a dynamic, internationally recognized speaker. He's an ADHD executive function coach, consultant, speaker. He hosts a podcast called the ADHD Essentials. He's a veteran educator. He's skilled at teaching people how to effectively manage the challenges they face. And he blends education, collaborative problem solving, and accountability with compassion, humor, and a focus on growth and strengths. He loves to help people affected by ADHD to troubleshoot and redesign their lives in order to lessen the impact of the disorder. And he gets ADHD because he has ADHD. Okay, so with
true story.
No further ado, or however you say that. Brendan, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to be here. I'm jazzed. Yeah, so the podcast, just so in case some of you don't know about it, I know there's a lot of people who are like, I have a podcast. And you're like, yeah, like since COVID started, and you have 4 episodes because you had nothing else to do. This is not one of those podcasts. It's been going for 3 years. I haven't missed a week since I launched, and I'm on episode 193. So I'm almost to 200. So it's like kind of a big deal podcast. It's got like lots. Jessica McCabe is going to be episode 195. She's around the corner. And I don't know what is happening with 200 yet. I'm still trying to figure that out, but it's like a legit thing. I'm part of the ADHD Rewired podcast network. So for those of you who have not heard about Rewired, that Eric Tivers hosts that podcast. His is aimed at adults. Mine is aimed at like parents specifically, and like parenting and that kind of stuff. We also have Hacking Your ADHD with Will Kerb, which is like ADHD strategies and stuff primarily. ADHD Diversified with MJ, which is aimed at ADHD and diversity. And the ADHD Friendly Lifestyle with Moira Mabin, which is aimed at really primarily at women kind of in midlife and navigating that element of ADHD. So it's kind of kind of a big deal. We have a lot of different shows on the network, and I invite you to listen to whichever ones sound interesting or good. My name is Brendan Mahan. I am coughing a lot for some reason. Poor timing on that. I apologize. I am an ADHD coach, consultant, and speaker. I have ADHD. My background is primarily education. I was a 6th grade English teacher. I've been a mental health clinician. I've been a school guidance counselor. I've been a principal. So that's sort of the approach that I take, is very mental health and education heavy. And I'm a dad of identical twin sons who are 12 years old. And so I get ADHD from the dad perspective too, right? One of my kids especially has ADHD. The other one, maybe not. They're both gifted. And one of my kids is also affected by OCD. So we've got like a lot of fun mental health stuff happening. And then my wife gets chronic migraines and has our own anxiety stuff. Like, we are a family that has some stuff. We got some stuff, ladies and gents. One of the things that helps me navigate that stuff and get past the wall of awful that can be built by, I have a family full of neurodiverse people, is, and it really works most. I learned this in practice because of my wife's migraines. Because like for a while she was getting 20 a month, which is an awful lot. And at least one or two of those was totally debilitating, where she couldn't do anything but stay in bed. And that's hard, right? Like, because sometimes my wife is just really cranky, and sometimes she's not helpful at all, and sometimes she's not even around to help. And it would be easy for me to get upset and frustrated with that and be like, I'm like a single parent. How come my wife can't help? Blah, 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 and that sort of thing, which doesn't work. And what I ended up doing was I just started thinking about how no matter how hard this is for me, this sort of being in the splash zone of my wife's disorder or her disability, it's worse for her, right? Like no matter how hard this is making things for me, it is worse for her. And I take that same perspective when my son's OCD starts flaring up, and man, can that be hard for the people around him. But when we think about how it's harder for him, it makes it easier for us to navigate and manage that. So if you are in a family, if you're here because you're not an ADHD person, but sometimes your person's ADHD bugs you and drives you crazy, it's worse for them. Like we know as ADHD people, like 50% of the time that our ADHD is flaring up and causing problems, at least 50% of the time. And we feel bad about it. And when we don't know that it's happening in the moment, we figure it out pretty quick afterwards. We're like, oh, I totally messed up. And then we feel bad about that. So recognize that it's hard for us too. That said, today we're going to talk about the wall of awful. So I will share my screen. I hope, fingers crossed that this works. Y'all seeing that? Some slides. Yay. So we're going to talk about the wall of awful. That's my website. Yay. My email if you care. We're going to talk about the wall of awful. I'm going to go as kind of quick so that we can do as much Q&A as possible. Is that cool with people? Does that work? All right. So some of this stuff I'm going to kind of gloss over, but you'll still get all these slides. I'll email it to you or to Chad, your Chad chapter. They can put it on their website or whatever. So we're going to talk about ADHD and failure and then the emotional impact of that. First off, and you probably already know this, ADHD is not a behavior issue. It's a deficit of the brain's executive functioning and the brain's development. It's a developmental delay. The brain of a kid with ADHD lags about 30% behind its peers. So roughly 1 to 3 years-ish. In the lab, it's 30%. In like practical, what does that mean? Experientially, it's like 1 to 3 years. So this is sort of like a boots on the ground versus science, psychological science stuff. Another challenge for ADHD is that we don't make as much dopamine as people who are neurotypical. So I just don't have as much dopamine as my wife does. Dopamine is the brain's anticipation and reward chemical. It makes us want to do stuff. And if I don't have as much, I don't want to do as much. And also there's a thing called dopaminergic reuptake, which is a big fancy word for recycling dopamine through the brain, kind of using it again, right? The ADHD brain doesn't do that well either. Like it's just not efficient. So it's kind of like my wife is driving a Prius with a full tank of gas. It's efficient. It's fully stocked on fuel. It's ready to go. And I'm driving a Hummer with a half a tank of gas. I just am not going to be able to go as far as she can, at least not without refueling, right? So that's what medication does. That's what exercise does. That's what some of our ADHD strategies, like being playful, those kinds of things. That's what that's doing. Even setting smaller, shorter term goals. If I'm not fueled as effectively as my wife, and I have to do the same stuff she has to do, or sometimes more, I'm going to fail more often. And that means that I'm going to struggle more. And that repeated failure is going to cause the wall of awful to build, which is what we're going to play with. Alternatively, sometimes when we're exhausted from doing too much and not having enough dopamine, sometimes we get that dopamine by burning anxiety, right? By being powered by anxiety. Anxiety is the only thing you can burn for fuel and wind up with more of it when you're done. And I can tell you, I have been flying on anxiety for the last year and 3 months since COVID started. During COVID, and I'm not trying to get like credit here because this is going to make some of you want to throw up. During the course of COVID, I ran my business, including posting podcast episodes and not missing a week, and having one-on-one clients and having parent coaching groups and doing workshops. I did all that to the tune of making a little bit more money than I made last year and more money than I made the year before that, despite COVID, despite a pandemic, and despite homeschooling my kids full time. So my kids are in 6th grade. I taught 6th grade. I homeschooled them for all of COVID because when we started, we didn't know what that looked like. And I was like, hey, they're going into my grade. I'll do it. So I taught them math and science and social studies. I took them skiing. I helped them build things, taught them how to cook. Like it was a little bit intense. I was telling the folks in the group prior to, I had my first day to myself a week ago. And it was my first day to myself since March 13th, 2020. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm not lying. I'm not kidding. That's a true story. COVID has been hard for me. Additionally, my kids needed some time to see friends. I ran a Dungeons and Dragons game weekly for my kids for almost all of COVID. We took a little bit of a vacation between like when school started. I ran it all summer long. Then school started and calendars got weird. So I stopped for maybe a month, started up again. And I ran a regular D&D game for me that I run once a month too. And I kept our social calendar going as much as I possibly could. I did almost all of the heavy lifting of executive functioning for my family, despite being the one with ADHD, because my wife is a laboratory-based scientist and just had to go to work. So she drove to work and did work and came home, which means she did not have the kind of load that I had. And I didn't fail much. I feel like I did. I feel like I did not do a good enough job as a homeschooling dad. I feel like I didn't do a good enough job as a business owner. I feel like I didn't do a good enough job at anything, which a lot of us coming out of COVID feel, right? Or still in COVID, because COVID was sort of set up so that you could be thoroughly mediocre at like 2 things, and then you're going to suck at everything else. Like that's just the nature of COVID and how it went. And so I'm having all kinds of fun guilt and shame stuff that I'm navigating with that. And that I want to honor that for everybody in this audience who is sort of there or was there or is coming out of that or whatever it looks like. And for those of you who are burning anxiety for fuel like I was for all of COVID, it's going to take you a little while to transition out of that. It's going to take I know it is for me. I don't know how to relax right now. I have a wall of awful for relaxing. Relaxing makes me feel bad. It makes me feel like I'm doing something wrong. I'm not doing the thing I should be doing. It's really a struggle right now, even though I know that's dumb and that I need to relax if I'm going to be useful to anybody. We watched a movie as a family yesterday and I fell asleep for the first 20 minutes. And the same thing happened last night. Apparently my kid had a meltdown last night and I was asleep already when it happened. And I never fall asleep fast. So I'm done. And y'all are allowed to be too. Some more ADHD stuff, jumping back into the slides. The ADHD attention is a lot like a candle. So my wife's attention is like this flashlight, right? She kind of shines it where it needs to be, pays attention to what she wants to pay attention to, and then moves it when she needs to. Mine is more like a candle. The ADHD attention kind of lights up the whole room and pays attention to everything. And then we have to try to filter out the stuff that doesn't matter so we don't get distracted and fumble the ball. These are the reasons why we fail, right? We fail because we don't have enough dopamine. We fail because our attention is not designed to focus on one thing. It's designed to focus on all of the things and struggle to let go of stuff. Also, we lack skills, right? Social emotional skills, attention and working memory skills, social skills in general, language communication skills, cognitive flexibility skills. We lack executive functioning skills, right? Working memory, planning and prioritizing, organization, time awareness, metacognition. This is a whole other workshop. So that's why I'm just zipping right through it. Because our prefrontal lobe is not as developed as our neurotypical peers. Mine is done. It's not going to grow anymore, but it's not that great. I know. I haven't looked at it, but I have ADHD, so I know it's not so hot. My wife has the sexiest executive functions on the face of the planet. It's part of why I married her. Mine are not so much. My social emotional skills are kind of hot though. Um, and also we tend to have like an overactive amygdala, which is the part of the brain that sort of, let me back up. Prefrontal cortex is like planning, prioritizing, careful thinking, right? The amygdala is the impulsive thing. It's the one that's like, am I safe? Do I need to worry? Is it danger, food, or sex? Like that's kind of what the amygdala cares about, right? And especially danger. It's like, am I under threat? I'm scanning the world for threats all the time. Our amygdalas can hijack us pretty easily. And that also leads to failure because now we're responding emotionally when we should be responding cognitively, and specifically emotionally in a defensive way, which brings us to these other executive functions, right? Response inhibition, not doing the thing I want to do, emotional control, maintaining our attention, initiating tasks, persevering in the face of challenge and just in the face of boring. It doesn't have to be like a big challenge. It can just be boring. And then flexibility of being able to shift cognitively from one thing to another or from one expectation to another. That's all the reasons why we mess up and fail. So what do we do about it? Right? Now we have a wall of awful. We have an understanding of why we're failing. The wall of awful is built by a million little failures. That's how it gets built. It gets built by way of tiny mistakes, big mistakes, failure. And it's made up entirely of emotions. So when it comes to building a wall of awful, every time we fail, we get a little brick in our wall, a failure brick. And along with that failure brick, we get a disappointment brick because we're disappointed in ourselves for messing up. But we also get a disappointment brick for anyone whose opinion of us matters as it relates to that failure. So that could be my wife, that could be my kids. If I'm a kid, that can be mom, dad. If I didn't do my homework, it could be my teacher. If I run a business, it could be my partner in my business. If I am employed, it could be my boss or a coworker, right? Every time we fail, we get these disappointment bricks. And here's the crazy part. It doesn't matter if they're disappointed in us or not. It matters how we perceive it. So if we mess up at work and we assume our coworker or our boss is going to be disappointed in us for making that mistake, we're going to get a disappointment brick, even if they're not disappointed. They might not care. They might not say anything because they don't care, but we're assuming that they care because we already have all these disappointment bricks from however many years of building them, right? And the more we get, the more we assume people are going to be disappointed in us. Along with a disappointment brick, we get a rejection brick because when we disappoint someone, we assume they're going to reject us socially. And again, doesn't matter if they really do or not. Y'all have that friend or that boss or that coworker, and you're like, you don't know why they're so nice to you because you're pretty sure they secretly hate you. Anybody know that person? That's a wall of awful. That person probably doesn't hate you. They're probably nice to you because you're splendid and you deserve to have people be nice to you. But your own insecurity in your mistakes and your challenges and your errors and your ADHD is causing you to think they must be lying to you when they're nice to you. They must be like trying to trick you, or they're just a nice person and they secretly seethe with rage every time they see me, but they're just so naturally nice that they don't even like let me see how much they want to murder me in my sleep. It's just not what's going on. What's going on is that you are valued and you are worth it, and you're just missing that for whatever reason. So let me tell you one more time. You are valued, you are valuable, and you are worth it. And when I say that you are worth it, I mean the struggle. I mean, you're worth it when everything is fun. Absolutely. You're worth it when everything is going smoothly. Absolutely. But when it is hard, you are worth it. When it is a giant pain in the ass to be your husband, wife, best friend, sister, cousin, brother, mom, dad, when that's happening, and these people are there by your side and caring about you, it is because you are worth it. Own that. because I know you don't want to believe me. And too bad for you. You are worth it. That said, along with failure and disappointment and rejection, we get doubt. Like, oh, I doubt that I'm worth it. Brendan's lying to me. No, I'm not. I know what I'm talking about. We get fear. What if Brendan is right? That's terrifying. What if I really am worth it? What does that mean? Right? And shame and guilt and worry and loneliness, all of that stuff. Someone is echoing at me. Did I miss something?
Ryan, can I get you?
Can I get a host to mute everybody? So along with this stuff, I want to touch on the guilt and the shame real quick, because they're different, but they seem like they're the same thing. Guilt is, I feel like I made a mistake. Shame is, I feel like I am the mistake. One of them is much more personal and harder to put down. If you feel like you made a mistake, maybe you did. Not the end of the world. Don't worry about it. Right? Like, fix it. Shame, I feel like I am the mistake, is debilitating. And if the reason you made the mistake is because you have ADHD, it's really hard to keep the guilt from becoming shame, because a lot of us sort of are that connected and committed and own our.
You're muted.
And make our ADHD a core part of our self-identity, right? This is how I avoid it. This is how I keep my guilt from becoming shame. Sometimes the ADHD wins. It kind of depersonalizes it, right? Like, it's not, I messed up because I have ADHD. Yeah, but I'm in a constant battle with my ADHD. I didn't mess up because I suck. I messed up because I have this disorder. And sometimes the ADHD wins. And you know what? That's okay. I can forgive myself for that. I can move on. I can accept the love and support and help of my family and friends, because I am worth it, just like you are worth it. The number one way to get your wall of awful managed and to get your ADHD managed is to practice self-compassion. The more we can accept that we're gonna mess up, and that doesn't mean that we suck at life, and that doesn't mean that we're unworthy of affection and love and caring, the sooner we can figure that out, the better off we're gonna be. And I am standing here as the guy who made this up, but still struggles with it. Right? Like, I still have trouble with that. There's still times that I'm like, I don't know if that's true. I don't know how that goes. I'm really bad at asking for help, and I'm really uncomfortable with accepting it, because I've been living like I've messed up for my whole life and feeling like I made that mistake. I should be the one who has to fix it and clean it up and solve that problem that I caused. I shouldn't be putting this on other people. So I hear you. It's hard, but we have to do it. We have to figure out how. My goal for this coming year is to figure out how to ask for help and how to accept it more effectively. The hardest part, I think, is going to be the organization part for me. I'm doing okay on the emotional side. I'm kind of getting it. I'm starting to figure it out. But the part about, like, I need help. Here's how you can help me with this big complicated thing. That's tricky too, because that's executive function. A little more about the wall of awful. Oftentimes a task involves more than one, right? So go into kids for a second. If a kid has a math homework assignment, they could have a wall of awful for math and a wall of awful for doing homework. And they have to deal with both of those walls of awful in order to get their math homework done. And sometimes a wall of awful sneaks up on us. I've been in kids' kitchens, so when I used to make house calls, hanging out with them while they did work, and watched a little brother come into the room, and all of a sudden my client can't do their homework anymore, because my client has a wall of awful for getting stuff done when their little brother is around, because the little brother interrupts them so much, and it shuts them right down. And I'm sure all of you have that. You have those moments where, like, you're cruising along and then all of a sudden you get interrupted, right? It could be like your kids. It could be your spouse. It could be your spouse in certain times. Like, if my wife comes over and starts telling me about some current event, I'm done. I'm like, you're just going to interrupt me for the next hour and a half with random current event things that you're looking at. or random internet stuff, memes and things that you're looking at. So there's no point in me trying to get work done because you're just going to keep interrupting me. So I'll just wait. Like I have a wall of awful for that kind of an interruption. There's other interruptions I can navigate more effectively, but not that one. Repeated failure that comes with all of this, it's going to make us draw inaccurate conclusions, negative conclusions about ourselves, our skills, and our abilities, and it's going to damage our self-esteem. Those conclusions are inaccurate. That really negative perspective you have on your abilities because of this repeated failure, it's not accurate. Reassess. A lot of it is based on stuff that happened forever ago, and it's just not true anymore. I remember I was in my guidance counseling internship, and I did like an end of the year sort of how's Brendan doing, and my teacher person asked my cooperating practitioner what are his strengths, and without missing a beat, she was like organization. And I was like, are you delusional? Like, what do you mean organization? That can't, what? No. But then I had to like take another lens, and I was like, oh man, I am good at that now. Like I used to suck at that, but I worked really hard and got better at it. And now it's a strength. Holy moly. That was true. And I had to deal with that. It was weird. And there's probably stuff like that for you guys too, or for your kids or your spouse, whatever brings you to this meeting. There's something going on with inaccurate stuff from the past, and just know that it's there. Also, that repeated failure is going to damage our motivation. It's going to hurt our optimism. We're going to feel helpless and trapped. It's going to trigger conscious and unconscious negative emotions and negative associations, which is really what the wall of awful is. It's going to sabotage us for the future. So what do we do with failure, right? Well, it happens to everybody, and it's really about how we respond. Are we going to decide that our goals are out of reach? Are we going to become demoralized and frozen and passive and helpless? Are we going to become overwhelmed and stressed and self-conscious? Or are we going to keep trying? We're going to try to slow our roll, try to get our emotions under control and keep moving forward and take a more accurate lens. Because, I made this mistake. And I always make this mistake. And then you're like, wait, I haven't messed up like this in like 3 years. Why am I having such a strong response to this and feeling like I can never do this thing when I've been doing it consistently for 3 years? And now all of a sudden, right? Like that anxiety from like middle school pops up, and it's like, no one likes you and you have no friends. And it's like, no, that's not true. That was middle school. Yeah, but not now. Right. And while I'm rabbit holing, speaking of friends, those of you who feel like you suck and you have no friends and nobody likes you, that's trauma from a global pandemic that caused us to isolate. That's what that is. Okay. No one hates you. No one rejected you, but your brain, all of our brains are going like, how come I haven't seen anybody for a year and 3 months? The only logical explanation is that everybody hates me and they just don't want to see me anymore. Because we don't have a frame for you lived through a global pandemic. That's not a thing that exists in like living memory. So when you start having those anxieties about reaching out to that person that you haven't talked to in forever, especially the ones that you only saw like here and there anyway, because the people you saw daily, you're probably starting to see them daily again if you're vaccinated and doing all that stuff. But the ones that you saw like once or twice a year, there's probably a lot of anxiety for them. Just reach out. It'll be fine. They don't hate you. You've just lived through a global pandemic and you are experiencing what I like to call, I think I made this word up. Trauma is the word I like to use for it. We lived through a global trauma event. All of us. It's shared trauma, but it was shared trauma in isolation. So we're not recognizing that we're all sharing it. I'm just one of those obnoxious people who talks about it all the time because that's the only way to normalize it. So sorry for making it weird. That said, moving merrily along, the wall of awful. Here's how we get past it, because that's really what you want, right? How do you get past this wall? 5 ways. 2 don't work. 1 works but is unhealthy. 2 work and are healthy. The ones that don't work, staring at it. You're not really engaging with your wall. You're just looking at it. You're like, man, I really feel anxious about mowing the lawn. That's nice. Or you're like, I got to mow the lawn. Going around it. Also, not so much. Like, you're not engaging with it. I'll mow the lawn, but first I'm going to watch like an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. And then I watch another one. And then I watch another one. And then I watch another one. And I never go and mow the lawn. Right? The first way that gets us past it, because the top two don't, is to smash the wall. This is when we get really angry and smash into it. Just use that anger to push through the emotional barrier that is the wall of awful. This might look like, fine, I'll mow the lawn. God, shut up. Why are you always on my case? Rah, 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 rah. Right? It's yelling at whoever that other person is, right? Or it might look like, why do I suck? Why can't I never mow the lawn? Why am I such a terrible homeowner, gardener, whatever? Like, why am I the worst person on the face of the planet and I can't mow my lawn? Right? Either you're Hulk smashing outwardly by attacking the person who is talking to you about the task, or you're Hulk smashing inwardly by attacking yourself for not doing the task. Neither of which are good because it damages relationships, either your relationship with that person or your relationship with yourself. The two things that get us past it and are healthy, the first is climbing it, which really means sitting with those negative emotions and navigating them and dealing with them. It looks a lot like staring at it to the outside observer because we don't know that that other person is climbing the wall. It looks like they're staring at it, but they're actually doing something. A good example of this is like, you might have been this kid, you might have this kid, but the kid that takes like 20 minutes to get their binders out of their backpack, you know that kid, right? And eventually the parents come over and they bust the teacher, and they pull the binders out and they put the binders on the desk and they're like, just go to work, get going. Like they flip them open to a random page and they're like, do the thing. And then the kid snaps, right? The hood comes up when they start sulking or they get all mad, storm off, yell at mom or dad or the teacher or whatever. Because what happened was that adult in their life just said, get to the other side of the wall of awful right now. And the kid was like, I'm climbing it. I've been climbing it for like 10 minutes. I just didn't know that was what I was doing because I hadn't heard Brendan talk about this before. And when the adult is like, get to the other side right now, they're like, oh, well, the only strategy I know is to Hulk smash. So I'm going to get really mad at you or at me. We're off to the races, right? Instead, a better thing to do is go over to that person and go, hey, are you climbing the wall of awful? And they'll be like, what's the wall of awful? And you'll be like, watch these YouTube videos by Jessica McCabe and how to ADHD. And they'll be like, oh, cool. Yay. Or you'll explain it to them, or they'll already know. And they'll be like, I think I might be. And sometimes this is for the inattentives in the audience. Sometimes the person just says, no, I'm not climbing the wall of awful. I'm just kind of spacing out. And that's totally okay too. Then you go, all right, cool. Do the thing. Like, let's unspace. Let's come back to earth and do the thing. Right? I know, because I have some of that inattentive in me and I sometimes space out. And it is helpful when my wife reminds me that I don't live on the moon. The other piece of this, the final way to get through the wall, is to put a door in it. And this just means changing your emotional state. We put a door in it. You can listen to music. You can exercise. You can talk to someone you care about. You can watch SpongeBob SquarePants. Just only watch one episode. Sometimes it's nice to hang out with your friends under the sea, but you got to get out of that and then do this next thing, right? You got to then move into whatever is the task. And putting a door in it looks a lot like going around it, as I've implied, to the outside observer. And sometimes we need support in getting out of the thing we're using to change our emotional state so that we can activate and do the thing that we want to do. Does anybody have any questions so far? Anything they want to? Because I can keep going if you want me to, but I also want to make sure that we get questions for those who have them. And probably your questions will send me to some other slide. Everyone's so quiet. You know what the best part of this is? I can just read names and like taunt people. I could be like, I think Kathleen has a question and she's just afraid to ask it.
I think everybody's muted, Brendan. So I don't know if you want people to raise their hand or if we want to keep going I certainly have at least several questions, but I
Up,
want to keep
down,
hearing
whatever.
more.
People
Let's
can
hear
raise their
more.
hands. They can type stuff in the chat. They can interrupt me mid-sentence. I'll keep going if you want.
Yeah. How
All
about
right,
keep
I'll
going?
keep going.
Nobody's raising their hand or
Okay, cool.
putting
I
things.
just I have ADHD. I'm comfortable being interrupted, so don't feel like you can't. And for now, like, use the chat if you got something. Feel free to throw it in there. All right. So Hulk smashing, right? Something that's important to do is to pay attention to what's hiding inside that anger, right? Because I don't know if you guys have noticed, but folks with ADHD, sometimes we have tempers. Not all of us. Some of us get a little grumpy. And often there's something hiding inside of that anger. If I can be unnecessarily transparent, often it's the dudes. It's a lot of the time it's the guys that get mad. Not always. Sometimes women get mad too, but women by and large typically are managing their emotions better than men are because misogyny and the fact that men are not allowed to have emotions. Like, we can be horny and angry and tired, and that's about all we get, which isn't how our emotions work. We have lots of other emotions too. We just wrap them up in the other three. So when you're angry, there's often something in there, right? You might be afraid. You might be feeling humiliated. You might be feeling rejected. You might be frustrated. You might be feeling vulnerable, basically. Because here's the deal. You'll notice that I turn my slides off when I have like a important emotional thing to tell you. Here's the deal. When it comes to feeling vulnerable, when it comes to negative emotions, we're bad at it and we don't want to feel that way, men especially. And anger is the only negative emotion that doesn't make me feel vulnerable, because anger makes you feel vulnerable. And then I can pretend that I'm not vulnerable, which is nonsense because I'm vulnerable all the time. But a lot of us haven't been taught how to do that. And so we get mad instead of owning the fact that we feel humiliated or scared or lonely, right? And it doesn't even have to be scared for me, right? I can't tell you how many parents I work with who are scared for their kids. They're really scared that their kids aren't going to make it in school and a job, whatever. And that fear is alien and not comfortable. And so it turns into mom or dad yelling at that kid for not doing their homework, which is dumb because that doesn't make the kid want to do their homework anymore. It makes them want to do their homework less because they associate it with arguing with mom and dad and with the miserableness that is homework in general, because homework is dumb. It is. It just is. And so it turns into this argument because of, like, mom can't just admit that she's worried about her kid, and the kid can't admit that they're scared that they aren't smart enough or whatever, right? Especially because the kid's like, I don't understand how I cannot do my homework when I understand everything. Like, I go into class and I understand all the stuff we're talking about, and then I come home and I don't know what to do with my homework. So maybe I'm not smart enough, but I know that I'm smart enough. But how can I not be smart enough? Because we haven't split that hair of, it's not about intelligence, it's about executive function. Is this making sense? Like that. And all of that leads to this ball of anger that happens a lot of the time. But it's really a ball of vulnerability. And the ball of vulnerability doesn't want to be vulnerable. So it puts all these anger spikes on itself like a porcupine. And it just isn't good. It's the more effort we can put into making it safe to be vulnerable individually and in a collective unit at work or in the family or whatever, the more comfortable we can get with vulnerability, the better off we're all going to be. Because and suffering, right? Like everything sucks. Life sucks, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be bad. It doesn't have to be bad that life is hard and there's struggle and there's a challenge. That can be like unifying and connecting, right? I came into this. I met with like the Chad group forever ago to talk about this meeting. I don't remember who it was. I don't think the person's even here right now. But I mentioned that my kid has OCD, and one of the people in I was talking to was like, "So do I." And it was like, boom, connectedness in suffering. Like, that's what that is. right? All of you are here connecting and suffering. You're like, I have ADHD. Really? I have ADHD. Oh, you have ADHD too? Yeah. Wow. Holy cow. We all have ADHD. And y'all live kind of near each other. Go hang out and like be ADHD together. It's awesome. You just talk and like interrupt each other and no one cares. And people wander away and show up late and it's not a big deal because you all get it. Like, just have a party and like forget to bring chips because that's how it's supposed to go. Like, it's fine. That's beautiful. And it's because we're being who we are and owning that vulnerability and owning that fear and that challenge. So moving merrily along. Here's some ways to climb the wall of awful. Oh, I have a question though. I'm going to read the question, then I'll go over to my ways, some other stuff about climbing. Husband seems to butt heads with my son during homework time. Then dad becomes angry. Hey, I might have already answered this question. Also, we ask him if the homework's done and then go online and see that it was not, or the teacher sends a past due notice. Then we have to backtrack. My son is 13, actually has pretty good grades in 7th grade. Never, ever, ever, Francesca, let me start with, I love you. You're the best. And you're an incredibly motivated and determined mom. I know because you're here. Here comes the bad news. Never, ever, 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 ever ask the question, is your homework done? Never. Don't ever ask that question. Here's why. And all of you know this is true. When you walk up to your kid and you're like, hey, is your homework done? What you're really saying to them is, do you want to lie to me or do you want to disappoint me? Which of those two things do you want to do? And you are not putting your kid in a fair position. So ask a different question. Say, hey, what did you have for homework? Or what do you need help with on your homework? Or can you remind me how you like submit your homework? That kind of stuff. Ask more open-ended questions. Don't go with the straight up yes or no's. Okay. And we ask that. There's a small piece of us that are like remember how our parents parented, which was, thoroughly mediocre at best. And it's like the gotcha question, right? It's the like, did you do your homework yet? Aha, I knew you didn't do it. Like that's kind of, we're all hoping for that moment, but we also don't want that moment. Like it's this weird thing. So just ask different questions. In terms of banging heads, your husband, I'm going to go deep. Francesca's already private messaging me, so you can let me know how close I get. This is how I usually see this. Dad has ADHD. I'm like 90% sure about this one. Dad's got ADHD, and every time your kid messes up on homework, dad is seeing his own screw ups when he was a kid, and he's encountering his wall of awful for when he was 13. And he's also afraid for his kid. So he's hitting like 15 walls of awful, right? He's hitting his from when he wasn't doing school. And then he's like remembering about how as he got older and he was screwing up at work and it was kind of the same thing, except it wasn't homework. It was like, I don't know, TPS reports. And like, that's really bad. And he's thinking like, oh my God, am I going to lose my job? Because my kid not doing my math homework is reminding me that I didn't do my TPS reports. Go ahead, Francesca. What'd you say? Okay. Someone said something. Like that's almost always what's happening in this case. And it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But until dad knows that's what he's doing, he's going to keep doing it. So it's dad's job to fix it. It's not your kid's job. This is why I run parent coaching groups, is I train this stuff. I teach parents how to do it better. I have like an 8-week-long answer to this question, which you're more than welcome to sign up for if you want to. Registration closes Wednesday. Not trying to be a pressure. It's just the nature of things. But literally registration closes Wednesday. And this is what I do, is like help parents navigate this stuff. But it takes a while. There's a lot of foundational stuff that has to happen involving parenting as leadership and connections and communication skills and systems and structures and all this kind of stuff. And anxiety and what it is and how it works. So yeah. That said, I'll jump back into some climbing stuff. Climbing the wall, like I said, is about sitting with difficult emotions and accepting the task at hand so that we can do it. So, like this climber dude, stuff that will help you be a stronger climber. 1, self-care, practice healthy eating habits, get some sleep, right? Like exercise, have some good relationships, that kind of stuff. Basic self-care is going to make you a stronger climber. Also, reframe failure. Oftentimes, there's a lesson in the failure. There's always a lesson in failure. And if you learn a lesson, you didn't really fail, right? Like that you didn't. So reframe that failure. And develop a growth mindset, which is really the whole idea of like failure is, did you fail though? Like you're not there yet, but you'll get there eventually. Unless you decide you don't want to get there, and that's okay too. Go do someone else. Go in a different direction. Nothing wrong with it. And then mindfulness is awesome for becoming a stronger climber because it helps us manage our emotions more effectively. It helps us put our attention in the places we want it to be. It's phenomenal. And learn how to be uncomfortable, because that's critical. If you can learn how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, it becomes easier to navigate the wall of awful. Because a big reason why we think we failed is because we just don't have the endurance to sit through the uncomfortable periods. And so we quit before we're really done. And you don't have to do that. Also, do the hard thing, as my friend Eric Tivers would say. And this is my favorite picture of Eric Tivers, by the way, because he totally looks like he's going to drop a dope soul album. Like it's so good. And this was my favorite slide when I presented this to Chad. And I was like, this is Eric Tivers. He was in the audience. It was great. Taking ownership of our mistakes is critical too. Like just own it, man. You messed up. Just own it, fix it. And this is where we start looking at the difference between a reason and an excuse, right? Like, because they're not the same thing. A reason is healthy and an excuse is not. An excuse is like, I am not responsible for this mistake. I don't need to figure out why it happened. I don't need to fix it. It's not a thing I need to worry about. That's an excuse to me. A reason is like, I messed up. I don't have to carry the emotional load of this mistake, but I do have to fix it. And I do have to figure out why I made the mistake so that I can try to avoid it in the future. But I don't have to feel like a terrible person because I made the mistake. That's how I split those two apart. An excuse excuses everything and is not helpful. A reason excuses the emotional weight, but not the solving. And honestly, it doesn't excuse the emotional weight either, because you're still going to carry some piece of it. We just want to not carry all of it. We want to carry like 10% if we can get it that small. But you're still responsible for it. You don't lose the responsibility. And my friend Peter's uncle Ben used to say that with great power comes great responsibility. And I like to flip that on its head and say, with great responsibility comes great power. Because if you're taking responsibility for your actions, there's a lot of power in that. And Katie says that taking responsibility becomes martyrdom. It can, yeah, that's sort of toxic responsibility, right? So pay attention to that. I don't have a much better answer than that. Like, just recognize that that's a possibility and try to avoid it, or figure out what level of martyrdom you can carry and carry that much martyrdom. Like, that's a thing too, as long as you're not chasing people off. So yeah. Also, Katie, I love the fact you saw right through me. You were like, Brendan's a martyr. It's like, I kind of am. Stupid being raised Catholic. So finally connected to this ownership is you got to be a leader of yourself, right? Like, just take the lead you and do the thing. Another piece to climbing is, I'm not accusing you, Katie. I'm accusing me of being a martyr. And Francesca wants the parent group info. So I'll throw that link in here in a minute. Another component to to the wall of awful and getting over it is that we can put handholds in the wall, right? So instead of picturing like a big brick wall, kind of imagine a big brick wall with like the climbing wall handholds in it to make it easier to climb, right? Like we can put handholds in it. And here's how. First off, assume good intentions, right? Assume that assume the good, assume that you're trying your best, assume that the person who is struggling is trying their best. Let's assume good intentions because it becomes easier to handle stuff, right? Like Francesca, whose husband is like, my kid doesn't do his homework and is getting all upset. If your husband can pivot and go, my kid is trying his best, he's just not succeeding in his homework. Now it becomes a different problem, right? If the kid is not doing their homework because they hate school, they're lazy, they're oppositional, that's nothing but yucky. And it doesn't really help with stuff. It doesn't help get the homework done. It just helps us have a reason to argue. But if we're assuming the kid is trying their best and is putting in all the effort they can possibly put in, and they're still not getting their homework done, well, what does that mean? That means there's probably a skill set that's missing. That means we probably have to change our approach. That's a much more useful place to be when it comes to getting homework done and solving this problem. Another method for putting handholds in the wall is to build some ADHD friendly skills. Like just find those ADHD friendly skill sets, which is what Chad is all about, right? Like that's the deal with Chad. So learn some. Here's an example. Set clearer, more attainable, and probably fewer goals. That's a great ADHD skill. For those of you who have like 100 goals, you get 3. You get to do 3 things a day. That's it. No more. Are you going to wind up doing more than 3? Yes. But you only get to plan to do 3. I have a client. We broke our goals down into the following 3 categories. 1, she's trying to find a new job because she lost her job due to COVID. She's got a lot of like insecurity around professional stuff and that sort of thing. 1 is to spend time looking for a job. Okay. Or building her professional like confidence up. And that might mean talking to networking people and that kind of stuff. The second one is to do something in her house that is like basically housework, right? Like clean up the cat room, file some papers, that kind of mundane stuff, because she needs to rebuild her self-esteem and her trust in herself, that she can do things and complete tasks and all that kind of stuff. And one way to do that is to like, clean the cabinets or she's got a ton of plants, like move plants up to the roof and bring plants down from the roof and water the plants and all that stuff to get these sort of mundane day-to-day tasks done. For her, that's hard. So doing that is helping to build her overall trust in herself, which is improving her confidence as a professional. Because she does have thoughts of like, I can't even water my plants. How can I expect to get a job? Well, you know how we fix that? Water your plants. Like, let's set Alexa reminders and stuff. Sorry if I just set your thing off. And then the third one is to go exercise because she's trying to drop some of her COVID 25. I'm trying to drop my COVID 25 too here. So like, and she's got a personal trainer. That's a goal for her. So like, let's do physical stuff too. Do something like that, but you only get 3. Also, develop time wisdom. Figure out how long it takes you to do stuff. Because if you don't know, it's going to be harder to do things. Going back to mowing the lawn, I used to think that mowing the lawn like took forever. I thought that mowing the lawn was an all-day task. It's not. I timed it. I developed some time wisdom. Turns out it takes me about an hour and 15 minutes to mow my backyard and about 45 minutes, about a half an hour to mow my front yard. That's not all day. That's like a 2-hour experience at most. And me knowing that makes it easier for me to mow my lawn, right? Because there used to be times when like 4 o'clock would roll around and I'd be like, oh, I forgot to mow the lawn. Well, I can't do it now because I don't have 15 hours to mow my lawn. And now I'm like, oh, I can bang out the front yard at least. And that's all that matters because people don't even see the backyard. They only look at the front yard. So my backyard can be like a jungle and who cares? So having this time wisdom makes it easier to do it. That helps me get past my wall of awful for mowing the lawn. Doesn't help with the hay fever, but it helps with initiating the task.
So speaking of time wisdom.
Yeah.
9:02. It's a little after 9.
Yep.
Catherine had a question in there. I don't know if you want to just put closure or finish the PowerPoint, or if you want to stop and look at Catherine's question.
Yeah, jump around. I'm cool. What do we do for a 17-year-old living in the wall of awful as a parent? I've changed school. So is the parent living in the wall of awful or the kid? I'm going to read this as though the kid is living in the wall of awful unless I hear otherwise. I've changed school to a therapeutic special needs. So that's been helpful. So the kid, I'm assuming, has changed schools. He's in therapy. That doesn't seem to help. But I see all the behaviors and attitude continue as you described. Catherine, you are more than welcome to unmute and talk to me if you want. Otherwise, because this is like a little vague. But no
It's
pressure.
A lot vague. But it is the child who's living in the wall of awful.
Okay.
And it's exactly like you described. And it's years and years and years of not being successful.
Mm-hmm.
And then comes the awareness. And then comes the self-doubt and, just feeling like I'm not going to bother because I can't do anything.
Mm-hmm. Can I be a huge jerk?
I give you permission.
Okay. And I might be guessing wrong, and feel free to tell me if I'm guessing wrong. This is totally like I caught a thing in your question that might matter. You wrote, I've changed school to a therapeutic special needs. Didn't he change the school? Like how I'm that's making me wonder, like, how much of the stuff are you doing and how much of the stuff is he doing? And does maybe he need to do more stuff that you're not helping him with?
Yeah. He it's exactly like you described. Somebody stops trying.
Right. And to some degree, and this is hard as mom and as dad, it's usually easier for dads, but half the time it's their own wall of awful that's making it easy because they're really Hulk smashing. They're not being like skilled and better at parenting like they sometimes pretend. Help him less. Like figure out where you can put your kind of, I'm not saying like set him up to like have a total catastrophe. That's not what I mean. But in areas where he can struggle and succeed or fail, and it's kind of low stakes, like try to put him into some of those positions right now. Especially ones that seem like high stakes, but are actually low stakes. Like help him get a job at a supermarket and then don't help him after that. Because if you get fired from your supermarket job, it seems like a big deal, but it kind of doesn't matter. Does that make sense?
I actually did that. and he got fired.
Yeah. But then you have to be like, all right, how come? What's going on? Let's go to the next supermarket, get another job. Like figure out what went wrong, do some reflection, and then move on, right? And do something else that requires some risk and some self-motivation, self-direction. And also, like, he probably needs a counselor.
He has one, but what people have told me is that these kids don't do well in therapy, typically. And unless I guess it's the right therapist, who.
That's true.
Yeah. Yes, I have him in counseling.
Mm-hmm. Does he have a coach?
He does not have a coach.
That might be a thing to look into. Because coaches just potentially do things differently than counselors do. Doesn't have to be true. But he might need like a coach that's willing to sit with him and be like, all right, what's your plan? What are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? And get him a coach that like will chase you away. Like that's the kind of coach you want. You probably want a dude. And you want a dude who is going to be like, Mom, go away, and then talk to your son. Because your son will tell him stuff or her stuff that your kid won't say in front of you, but will say when you're not around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't want to be part of it. I don't want to be enabling him. I want him to do things himself because he's got to learn.
And also, I can't say this enough, and this is not an excuse, but it's a really important reason. Remember that your kid just lived through a global pandemic, right? And it's really important to look at his age, because I'm assuming stuff was hard a year and a half ago too, but it's probably gotten considerably worse since. And I'm imagining a kid who is struggling kinda, but making it a little bit, like it seems okay. And then the world falls apart. And your kid who is supposed to be looking at the future and have this big, bright future in front of him, but is struggling to get to that future, is suddenly living through an experience along with the rest of the world that makes him think, well, maybe there isn't a future anymore. And that can create a really hard wall to get past. And that's not even a wall of awful. That's like an entirely different kind of obstacle where it just seems pointless. That may have happened to your son. I'm not guaranteeing it. Like, I don't know. I've never met him. I'm kind of talking out of my butt at the moment, but that seems like a straight line to me. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. Anyway, I agree with the coach. I think that's what he needs, and I think that's my next step. So I can reach out to you offline and see if you have any recommendations there. But yeah, he's been pretty, I hate to say this, but he's been unaffected in a sense by COVID because he was sort of isolated before. And then when I changed schools, they actually met face to face. So he's actually less isolated, I guess, than he was before because he was in a situation where he just couldn't succeed.
Awesome. I'm glad that things are moving forward a little bit, at least, it sounds like.
Yeah. So that's positive. But thank you. And everything you said is, I think is right on.
Thank you.
And it's a way to describe what these kids are living in.
Right. It's a big deal. Any parents in the audience, like, COVID is a bigger deal than we realize. Because for us, it was like a year-ish. It was hard and it was weird, but we understood it and we kind of had a framework for it, kind of. But our kids didn't have the kind of framework that we had, and it was a much bigger part of their lives than it was of ours. COVID is no joke. So just recognize that for the parents in the audience. Like, COVID was 1/12 of my kid's life. And feels to them, I'm sure, like a 5-year-long experience. At a time when they should have been starting to make their like social stuff happen, social connections and friend groups and figuring out who they have a crush on and all this kind of stuff in like the most 6th grade way possible. They didn't see anyone but each other, almost. And that's just my kids. For Kathleen's kids, for Catherine's kid, it's I have this world in front of me, and now I don't have the world in front of me. It's not true that I can now go and do anything I want to do because all I can do is stay home all the time. It's a big deal. And again, it's not an excuse, but it is a reason. And it's something that we need to do a better job of factoring into our thinking when we talk to and work with our kids. COVID started like a month or two in, and I had people going, well, my kid plays football. And I was like, no, he doesn't. That's not what your kid does right now. No one plays football right now. Your kid might play football later, but right now your kid doesn't play football. And it was like jarring, right, for parents. And it still is because now we feel like we should just come out of this and it should be like, well, that's over. Yay. That's not how it's going to work for our kids. It is not how it's going to work for us. We would like it to be the case, but it's not, which is only tangentially connected to the wall of awful, except that it is deeply, deeply connected to the wall of awful. the same time.
So Brendan, it's almost 9:15.
Mhm.
I don't know if anyone has any more immediate questions. I'm sure we could meet with you for hours just to hear
Yeah, feel free to be like, shut up, Brendan.
how you're thinking about things. But I do always like to respect people's time and the limitations. So unless there's a burning question, and you can get in touch with Brendan go ahead, Brendan, tell them where they
Oh
can.
yeah. You can go to ADHDessentials.com to see my stuff, I guess. You can email me at brendan@ADHDessentials.com. That goes right to me. And please mention this, like, I was in the Chad event, so that I jump you to the top of my queue, because I'm a little drowning in email still. If anyone is interested in the parent coaching groups, like, register, mention that you were here. But for real, like, I'm wrapping them up. They're only at 5. I'll give you the details really quick. There's a 5:00 section. It's kind of ish full. We meet for an hour on Mondays and Wednesdays, beginning July 12th and wrapping up on September 1st. July 12th is a week from today. So they start like now. So if that's too fast for you, that's okay. I have another group starting at the end of September, and I can plug you in there. But if you're interested in learning more about them, it's all of a half an hour conversation, and where I go, this is what the groups are. Do you want to sign up? So that's the deal.
Someone's asking for the name of the podcast for women with ADHD or older women.
That is the ADHD friendly lifestyle. And I can try to call up that link real quick.
Who is that runs that?
Moira Maben.
Brendan, your podcast is on Fridays?
Sure.
No.
My podcast is a little in flux. My podcast was dropping on Saturdays for all of COVID. COVID is now over. My goal is to back it up to at least Friday, maybe Thursday. But yeah, it's on probably somewhere between Thursday and Saturday. I don't know yet. I have ADHD. Like, everything is different for me as of like Monday of last week. Like, I'm still figuring out what that all means. But yeah, it'll be posting somewhere with Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
And can they access past podcasts, and that they just go to your website for that?
Yeah, you can go to my website. If you click subscribe on your podcast player of choice, you should be able to get to all of the past episodes. There's a lot of them, for real. There's really 193 episodes. So, yay.
So will you come back again? Maybe next.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm going to be in New Jersey in August to visit my in-laws. So if y'all want to hang out,
you'll have to tell us. We'll talk after we sign everyone off. So I want to thank you again. Just to let people know, the recording will be on our website, as well as the PowerPoint, which Brendan is going to forward to me. Right, Brendan? And we're so delighted. And you just sparked so many thoughts and so many ways that are different, shifts. You're offering us shifts in our thinking